Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Lack of SAF Supply, Risk of Double Counting and More, Unpacking Book and Claim Blockers and Developing Greenhouse Gas Reporting Protocol to Overcome Them. Thank you all for joining us today. My name's Roz. I'm the Event Director for Sustainable Aviation Futures North America. Sustainable Aviation Futures hosts a global series of high-level aviation decarbonisation conferences, bringing together the entire value chain to network, connect, and discuss the capabilities for scaling sustainable solutions to reach net zero by 2050. Over the next 60 minutes, our panel of experts are going to discuss the status of SAF supply, how book and claim can help to scale that supply, what challenges must be overcome to do that, including stakeholder skepticism, avoiding system risk, and how incentives compare to other regulatory instruments. The webinar is being hosted ahead of Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress North America, which is taking place in Houston from October 2nd to 4th. Today is going to provide a snapshot into some of the topics that will be covered at the event, which will include several of our speakers today, and is also supported by Shell Aviation and World Energy. The three-day event features over 700 senior leaders and industry experts from across the aviation and energy value chains to discuss announced SAF projects and exciting offtake agreements in North America, the path to meeting the industry's ambitious targets, as well as the global SAF landscape and innovative low and zero emission technologies. Also coming up in the Sustainable Aviation Futures calendar is the Due Diligence course, an online training course which is hosted over 3 days, and it's going to cover in-depth modules on investment screening, maximising capital raise processes, and helping buyers and sellers see each case from an alternative perspective. If you'd like to keep abreast of all of our upcoming events, as well as gain access to exclusive interviews and articles, be sure to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, SAF Spotlight. Finally, before I hand over to today's moderator, just a couple of pieces of housekeeping. The session is being recorded and will be distributed to everyone tomorrow. There is also a Q&A at the bottom of your screen, so please ask any questions you have in there and we'll do our best to answer them, although there's a lot to be covered, so we might not get to audience Q&A. With that, I'm pleased to hand over to our brilliant moderator, Quentin Barnes, the Programme Manager for Decarbonisation Market Measures at Smart Freight Centre. Quentin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Roz. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here. Quickly share a screen. All right. So, yeah, I'm Quentin Barnes. I'm the program manager from Smart Freight Center over market-based measures. So that means about half of the time I am on SSC-specific programs, such as our market-based measures framework or other related support programs. And about the other half of the time, I'm the co-chair of the Book and Claim Community, which is a project that SSC leads together with Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI. I'm super excited to have our speakers here today. It's been great to chat with them, even a little bit more than our normal discourse. In anticipation of this meeting, but I would love if they could introduce themselves just a little bit in their own voice and tell us who they are and a little bit about their organization, just so we can all locate some of their comments in the subsequent conversation. Andre, please kick us off.
Thanks a lot, Quentin, and thank you to everybody who's tuned in today for what I'm sure is going to be a really great discussion around sustainable aviation fuel. So my name is Andre DeFontaine. I'm a senior director at a nonprofit organization called the Center for Green Market Activation, and we are brand new. We're pretty much a month old for this NGO. But while the organization is new, a lot of the folks that work there have been involved in these issues for a very long time. Mainly through our work on the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, which we run in partnership with RMI and the Environmental Defense Fund. So SABA, as it's known, works with about 30 or so corporate customers that are seeking to meet their Scope 3 reduction targets through the purchase of SAF certificates and really try to drive greater scale in the market. So we work with them to aggregate demand and execute transactions in partnership with a lot of folks that are actually on this call this afternoon. Look forward to talking more about that during the panel discussion.
Sure, thanks, Andre. Quentin, thanks for having us today. My name is Brian Ripson. I work for Shell Aviation. I'm the sustainability manager looking over the Americas region. In my role, I've been in this role for about 6 years. I manage our SAF supply and sales. I also developed our Shell Aviation SAF strategy years ago. I am also the creator of our book and claim program that we call, you may have seen it called Aviation. And so, yeah, I've been in the jet fuel industry for over 20 years, whether it's at an airline or at Shell. So thanks.
Appreciate it, Madison.
Thank you, Quinn. Super excited to be here today and have this conversation that we all know is critically important. I am the Executive Director for the Council on Sustainable Aviation Fuels Accountability, but we usually just call it COSAFA because that's quite a long title. And we are working on the generally accepted accounting principles for SAF and SAF transactions. So that is supporting registries and registries development, providing consistency on the environmental attributes and the way those flow from producer to end customers, and how the accounting works there. We are both business and commercial aviation, split 50-50, representing both sides of the industry. So work a lot with a different sector with business aviation, that it also brings an important perspective to the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here today. I'm Sarah Chow. I sit on the environmental sustainability team at Southwest Airlines. I manage our commercial sustainability programs across the enterprise, but for the context of this webinar, I manage our corporate SAF program, and I represent Southwest when we collaborate on industry and cross-industry efforts around book and claim, SAF accounting, and sustainability certification.
Amazing. Last but not least, Scott.
Hi, so my name is Scott Lewis. I'm very happy to be here. I'm the Managing Director at World Energy Net Zero Services. I've been in the low carbon fuel space for well over 20 years, starting in biodiesel, going through renewable diesel, and then in 2018 we acquired our site in Paramount, which was the first sustainable aviation fuel production facility in the world. And we have scaled that up significantly each year and are in the process of taking that facility up to a 25,000 barrel per day facility that will be coming on in a couple of years. And I head up the inset program, primarily generated around sustainable aviation fuel. And so thank you very much. Look forward to the session.
Right on. With that experience, you know, we all just get to sit back and have an amazing conversation. You know, I'm just going to be trying to guide this today and let those, you know, the high points of your practical, commercial, and really hands-on sweat that you've been putting into these systems and products and services over the last year's show. And we're going to be having a few slides behind us. It's not necessarily going to sync up exactly with the content, but want to be able to provide some additional information, some sources maybe you have or haven't seen, and be able to provide some extra texture and color to the conversation. So yeah, you know, would love, especially, you know, Brian, given your you know, stated experience in the infrastructure of, you know, existing conventional fuel as well as sustainable fuel. Would love maybe if you could kind of help us understand, you know, what is the status of supply today, and give us some context for you know, some of the framing that Roz gave us. You know, is it lack of supply? And you know, when we see these huge numbers, you know, billions of barrels, tons, liters, you know, it all sounds like a giant amount, but you know, it's truly amazing the amount of fuel that we need to run our economy, and appreciate a little bit of context.
Sure, I can chime in a little bit on that. Like, yeah, so when I said in my introduction, I've been in the jet fuel world for over 20 years. Most of it has been at Shell Aviation, and in the early days of my conversations in the jet fuel world, and we would talk about SAF, you know, it would be like, hey, there's this, you know, do you want SAF? It's more expensive than jet fuel. And the answer was always kind of no, right? And then we just all move on and we just continue to supply, you know, jet fuel. And that was kind of the first decade of my work at Shell Aviation was, you know, mostly jet fuel, talk about SAF a little bit, wasn't really picking up any traction. And then it was about 6 years ago, I made the switch over into full-time SAF. And it was at that time, we wanted to say, okay, there seems to be a bit of a shift in the industry here today, where yes, SAF is more expensive than jet fuel. There are incentives out there in some locations to help decrease the gap between SAF and conventional jet fuel, but they don't cover the gap fully. And so we kind of sat down and, inside, at Shell a little bit and said, okay, what are the problems with SAF? Like, why hasn't this got, like, what are some of the key constraints that we have here? And we noted that there was, like, when I drew something on the board, it was like, what are the problems? We've got volume, lack of volume, this price is in this high price. There's no logistics for this. The blending infrastructure doesn't exist, and there's no demand. And so if you looked around to try to say, how do you solve one of these problems? So if you have a volume, pricing, logistics, and a demand problem, where do you actually start? Where do you make the intervention to start solving the picture? Because what happens is because there's no volume, there's no logistics. The no logistics means that there's, the bespoke, complicated, expensive logistics for the very little volume that's out there, which is driving the increase in price. The increase in price means there's no demand. Like, so you could do this all day long to say, like, okay, you have this kind of spaghetti model going, okay, like, where do we start to try to get SAF off the ground and get moving and start in significant volumes. And in that time, what has really happened here is that the demand box has been moving, right? So in this time, we have seen that, corporations that are using airlines for business travel and shipping, have begun to make, looking for solutions that can help them make their net zero targets, how to decarbonize their activities inside their company. And they're beginning to get more and more involved with their airlines and their shippers to help fund decarbonization activities. And so in this change that we've seen since the early days of SAF to now, is we've seen the demand pick up. So we've been seeing demand start pushing on looking for more SAF supply, which as more SAF supply comes into, as this demand picks up, we get more SAF supply. As more SAF supply comes online, we get to build out logistics and infrastructure that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that supply, because like, we're traditionally not just going to build infrastructure and have it sit empty forever, so we needed the supply to come. And so as that has been happening, we've been getting more supply, more logistics, more volume on. The more volume, we've been getting more sessions like this where we're increasing the awareness of SAF out there, so more people are getting involved and more corporations are getting involved, growing demand. So we're starting to see this uptake in volume, which you see on the slides here now, as we have demand in the background now driving more SAF supply, which is now driving the market going forward. Where before, when that wasn't available, and this is from a North American perspective where we don't really have the mandates driving, the corporate demand now sitting in the background driving SAF supply and logistics and getting in volume, and there has really been the step change within the last couple of years, making the increase in supply. And we're seeing that through 2021 and now certainly, as the graph shows, kind of ramping up into the future here.
Awesome, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I'm would love Scott, if you've got things to say on some supplier perspective as well later. I'd love to hear from Sarah, if that's possible, from the kind of the aviation operator and carrier perspective. And how do you see this status of supply today, and is there anything that you'd like to add from your operator perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So IATA released that SAF in 2023 was about 0.2% of total jet fuel demand, which we did see is double that of 2022. So an awesome increase, but of course, very far off from where we need to get to. We, like many airlines, have a goal for 2030 to replace 10% of our total jet fuel consumption with SAF. In our annual sustainability report for last year, we reported that we're currently sitting at 2% secured through offtake agreements. And of course, we recognize that as we're working to procure these volumes, that not all of these projects will come to fruition. And so we need to be actually planning for higher than what our goal is. And then, of course, the volumes needed to meet 2035 and 2050 goals beyond 2030 is exponentially higher than that. So it is exciting. We're seeing a lot of promising developments and seeing more producers come online. Of course, some of that volume is to meet SAF mandates that are starting to come online next year as well. One thing that's been interesting is that with more SAF supply coming online, kind of for the first time, I think we're seeing airlines have a little bit more optionality. There's a little bit more competition in the market, which has been really exciting for us. It's still very expensive, which I think everybody on this webinar knows. But we also are encouraged by a lot of the positive momentum with incentives. I think maybe later we'll talk a little bit more about that, but seeing kind of tax credits in Illinois and Minnesota with, really substantial dollars behind that, and just creating the opportunity to bring SAF to new airports. And then, of course, I want to end just, kind of Brian touched on this, but corporate support has been vital for Southwest and for many airlines to be able to increase SAF in our operations. And so we're very appreciative of the recognition and support across the value chain that airlines can't do this on our own, and that it will take the whole value chain.
Well, I'd be remiss as a Washingtonian not to mention Washington's incentive as well up there. Gotta pander to the state. But at least you do have more airports you can uplift at. How's that experience been? From again the operator perspective. Curious if you have anything there.
Yeah, so we are lucky in that Southwest does operate at airports that receive deliveries of SAF today, and that are actively working towards receiving deliveries of SAF in the near future. And kind of, again, seeing more incentives come across in different states and having that competition in the market as well for, where is the most attractive place to bring SAF is something that as an operator really helps us and has us thinking as well around kind of logistics of what would it take for us to bring SAF to these airports that have incentives. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. Scott, I'm curious if you have anything to add there, and also I'm super curious from the World Energy perspective. Not to put you on the spot, but wonder if you can kind of bring in the element of like so how does book and claim, or how does kind of this different approach, emerge needed? Is it the same chicken and the egg, or 4 chickens and eggs, kind of as Brian was talking about, or is it something else?
Certainly. Well, I think that and part of this addresses the, is there an additional cost for SAF? I think it's easy to say if you take it as a whole, it is. But in fact, I think it gets divided into different products. And there's a physical fuel that should be worth what, replacement with petroleum jet fuel is worth. And then it's the work that the SAF does, or the carbon mitigation, that is where that additional money has to go to contribute to it. So I think we're trying to create, at World Energy certainly, but I think most companies are trying to create the most carbon effective product to put in so that you get greater displacement. I think more and more people are recognizing that their objectives are not for a gallon of SAF as much as to mitigate a certain number of tons or a percentage of their carbon footprint. And I think to me, it seems to be easier to justify you're buying a different product. And that product is about insets, of course, being carbon mitigation in sector. So if the best way to mitigate carbon emissions from petroleum is to leave it nicely, safely sequestered underground. And so wherever we can displace petroleum jet fuel with sustainable aviation fuel, and obviously the more effective it is at mitigating carbon, the more valuable that fuel is going to be. And that we want to do that in the most carbon effective way. And so as the liquid fuels industry has been doing for over 100 years, they build logistics system to be able to deliver it to where it can be combusted in the most efficient way. They're very good about that. And so while we've got such small production volumes, I think it's really critical to see that combusted as carbon efficiently and logistically efficiently as possible. One, of course, because it keeps the carbon intensity lower, and two, it keeps the cost lower. If you have to ship it across the country, it's going to just add layers. And so is it best if you could see fuel that sustainable aviation fuel that was produced in Minnesota or in Illinois combusted in Minnesota or Illinois? I think that makes a lot of sense. That's what we try to do with our fuel, which is produced in California right now. And that allows us to keep it as a very effective mitigation tool. And so the way this works in our eyes is that we want to put it in, it's all commingled in the same tanks with petroleum jet fuel. And so it's about having a robust and credible tracking system to ensure that the SAF, physical SAF, has gone in where it's gone into the system, to ensure that it has been combusted, and have a data pack that translates and carries all of the certification and third-party verification to ensure that it's effectively a gold-plated inset, which is worth more, which helps to mitigate the cost. So I think that where book and claim, and remember, book and claim is a concept that is effectively applied in every government scheme for compliance. Certainly the RFS is book and claim. The low carbon fuel standard is book and claim. I think that what we're trying to build within our industry now is a robust and credible third-party verified system that is going to ensure the data is readily available and third-party verified that can travel with it. And so, does it make sense to ship fuel across the country? I think that's antithetical to mitigating carbon. If you can mitigate it anywhere, you're mitigating it everywhere. So can that unit, that SAF-C, that SAF certificate, that inset, be transferred to somebody who may have not flown in out of that airport? We think that that's the step that is going to lower the premium for carbon mitigation, to make it happen more efficiently, make us more credible within the environmental community, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, amazing. All right, so we've got limited supply. It looks, like from the previous slide, that certain airports have been able to achieve continuous delivery. Others are getting batches. I imagine airports are starting to kind of jockey a little bit because they want to supply SAF. Now, some of them can't find it. The carriers can't find it. I appreciate you starting to introduce kind of the book and claim components, verification, kind of a gradation of quality, and many different variables in between. We'll hop into kind of some of that book and claim chain of custody infrastructure in a minute. Curious if we can kind of zoom out for a second. Madison, if you can help us understand, these are large, a lot of these are large airports, big SAF facilities. How many, what is this overall system we're looking at? Kind of what are some of these, issues that might pop up as we're looking at a physical supply world, as well as a kind of a market-based approach to the physical world?
Yeah, I'm gonna, I think, touch on a couple of things here. One, to build on what Scott and what's been said earlier, is showing the demand for SAF, continuing to grow that demand, bringing customers to the market. So I mentioned earlier that I work with Business Aviation, and I want to also mention them in this. They are a lot of times still representing the corporates, but they are the corporate jets. So they are buying physical SAF as well, looking for Scope 1 decarbonization. They are not usually flying out of airports that actually get SAF. There are some FBOs that do actually get physical SAF, but very few. They represent another market base that can help show this demand. But again, trying to use SAF in the most efficient and effective way does not mean moving SAF to small airports throughout the country. It means displacing jet fuel with SAF in areas that it makes sense, and allowing these corporate jets to purchase those environmental attributes or insets to also be another contributing customer to decarbonizing aviation. So it's essential for the business aviation community to have book and claim. And as Scott said, the system elements are key into ensuring that this book and claim distribution people have confidence in actually buying these insets and what the service that they are procuring. And so I think that, goes into some of these other elements that Scott touched on and that COSAFA is working on, is how do we work as a system of registries, either, with unique customer bases or regional differences. How can we incorporate this into, as Scott said, that gold-plated information package? So that way, when you purchase that inset, you know what markets it's eligible in, where you can use it, what it's already been used for before, if it's generated credits in an LCFS or an RFS RINs. What does that mean for an end use from an accounting perspective? I think having consistency across the board and the interoperability in all of those systems is really key. And I know a lot of the people on this call are working on that. That's something that COSAFA has been working on for the last 2.5 years. And Smart Freight Center and others are having these conversations to ensure that we can develop those really requirements that support it, that Scott said. And, I would just kind of leave it at this, that that is fundamental to book and claim, but I think it's fundamental to all SAF transactions. Whether you're getting the physical SAF, you still need that information package of what that attribute is that you're actually purchasing, whether it's decoupled or, still attached to that physical product for upload.
Yeah. Touched on multiple interesting points, but I mean, a lot of times I come back to, again, just this, what you said about business travel, what you said about, smaller FBOs. It's not necessarily just small planes that go through smaller airports. There's all sorts of traffic all over the place. And Andre, I want to get to you in a minute, so kind of putting you on deck. You've been, greasing the skids of this, of how corporates and other organizations can engage. But as we're kind of taking a step from like the physical SaaS world into more of the book and claim chain of custody approach, Sarah, curious if you had anything to add from kind of like I don't know, when Southwest first started looking at book and claim, or when you saw it as a necessary, tool to get over some of these physical obstacles.
Yeah, so we know that SAF is critical to decarbonizing aviation. And as Scott and Madison already stated, book and claim is the most cost-effective and environmentally efficient chain of custody model in order to do that. I think about book and claim as just enabling more market participants, both from the aircraft operator side looking for scope 1, as well as end customers or intermediaries, and just ultimately facilitating shared investment. And it just increases the availability and access that everyone in the economy has to purchase goods and services transported with SAF. And so, again, kind of as I stated earlier, Southwest is lucky in a way to be able to fly to airports today that have access to physical deliveries of SAF. But looking at, and I know it was a few slides back, but a lot of regions of the world don't have access to that. And it would really be a shame and a detriment for our industry if all of those companies and airlines and businesses weren't able to have access to SAF and participate in this market that's so critical.
That's, I think, a perfect segue. Couldn't have asked for it better. Andre, how are you guys hopping in and helping with that? And I'm curious what the center can, you can add in terms of challenge to get folks and the help to get folks from I guess this physical world, into more of a book and claim system. How are people trying to use it?
Yep. Well, thanks for the question, Quentin. And I think a lot of what our other panelists have shared already, I totally agree with. And I think, my perspective on this issue is really informed by the work that we do with the corporate customers that are involved in the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance that are trying to purchase SAF certificates to meet their scope 3 reduction targets and leverage book and claim systems. And I think that, a lot of the work that we've tried to do is to design a system that is truly robust and credible and delivers high integrity outcomes, because ultimately, the demand side of this is being driven by companies that are trying to meet climate targets. And so they want some assurance that the investments that they're making, and I think we do need to remind ourselves that SAF is expensive, and if the corporate customers are paying a significant premium they want to make sure that those reductions that are being delivered to them are real, credible, and that they can count towards their targets. I do appreciate Scott's comments about, book and claim is not a new concept. It's been around and utilized in different regulatory systems and also the renewable electricity market. And it's been very effective. But as long as these mechanisms have been around, there have always been some skepticism and some questions raised about the design and the execution. And for the most part, I think the skepticism is actually healthy because it challenges those of us involved in system design to be very, very careful about the guardrails that we build into the systems to ensure the credibility, because without the credibility, the environmental outcomes can't be delivered and the market won't grow. And so just to raise a few issues that we've heard and that we have been very enthusiastic about working on, what we hear from our customers are that, they want to make sure that the carbon reductions are real. So this is often implicates third-party certification of the environmental performance of the fuel. They also want to make sure that the fuel production process doesn't create unintended environmental consequences, which can be a thing with biofuels production if it's not done appropriately. And that there's protections against double claiming, that the claims that the corporation is able to make at the end of the transaction have not already been made elsewhere incorrectly within the value chain. The reductions go beyond what would have been required by existing law. And then related to all of this, that those reductions really can count towards their climate targets. I think the good news is, by and large, we have the tools to address all of these issues due to a lot of the good work from the people on this call and elsewhere.
Right on. So I appreciate you touching on kind of who the customers are, what do they care about. The system can appear complex, anytime jumping into an ISO definition, it's both supremely helpful and sometimes takes two reads at it, to fully grasp the full definition that brings. And yeah, it's a complex system, as we saw kind of in that previous slide. A lot of different parts are coming together at that airplane. We are still physically flying somewhere. I'd love to kind of switch gears a little bit into system risk and kind of a little bit more of just a book and claim system portion of this. At least at the Smart Freight Center, it's been really helpful for our membership and even conversations that we're supporting into the book and claim community to kind of see the systems that support this chain of custody. Again, this is a chain of custody. You got physical separation. I'm taking it directly to the plane or the airport. You got mass balance. Don't have time to jump into those, but we're talking about book and claim, which is often right in there as a third chain of custody system. And Brian was talking about, the getting the fuel to the airport, your sustainability certification system, in this case, even more important if the actual physical fuel is elsewhere. You got your registries in the middle, the rules for registries as well as those actual registries. And then you have kind of the final pillar of that third pillar, the accounting framework. I'm curious, I don't know, maybe Andre or Sarah, if you want to kind of help us understand, how do we avoid this system risk while we're getting these systems off the ground, using them the first time? What's been your approach? Either of you, please.
I'll go first, and I'd love to hear Sarah's comments too. I mean, I think you're showing on the screen right now, Quentin, a lot of the really important tools that are needed to avoid system risk. So certainly, and I saw a question come through in the chat regarding the third-party certification, and I do think that this is really important because you got to go back to kind of we're talking about book and claim, but ultimately, this is all grounded in the material world. So you want to make sure that the fuel that's being produced actually is a marked improvement over conventional jet fuel. And this is complicated because you're doing life cycle assessment analyses, and so you want to have a certain degree of confidence in the carbon intensity output that comes out of that. So we look for all of our transactions. The SAF does need to be certified by a third party. We utilize only certification entities that have been accredited by ICAO. That's our threshold. There are others out there, but we've set the threshold that it has to be ICAO accredited. And then we also believe that all of the transactions do need to flow through a registry so that the chain of custody can be tracked in a consistent and digital way to avoid these issues of erroneous double counting. And then ultimately on the accounting side, this has been one that does have some complexity. Again, partially the biofuel space is a little bit tricky in terms of greenhouse gas accounting just in general. And you've also got to think about the relationship between the Scope 1 claim made by the airline, the Scope 3 claim made by the corporate customer. So guidance is definitely needed there. We did, through SAVA, partner with the World Economic Forum's Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative to publish SAF certificate accounting guidance a couple years ago. We're now in the process of updating that. We hope for a new draft to be published, if not later this year, then next. The market is moving so fast, it's super dynamic. Already in the last couple of years, we've noted a few things that do need to be updated. So looking to issue a new draft of that soon. So those are the major buckets of things that we think are really, really critical to address some of these system risk issues that you brought up, Quentin.
Yeah, Sarah, would love to hear from you. Fuel providers, how is it different than just putting liquid fuel into a plane?
Yeah, I'd chime in and say for our SAF, we have published our SAF procurement policy, and kind of similar to what Andre outlined, we do require that any SAF that we use be certified to a CORSIA approved sustainability certification scheme. I think going back to that diagram that you had showed up, it's really important kind of across the SCS, then the registries, and then the accounting, that each of these are playing a function, and that a lot of times when we talk about book and claim, we kind of merge them with each other. But it's really important that SCS is there to say, yes, the SAF has hit these life cycle emissions reductions that are credible and real. And then having the registries, which are definitely, I think, where the industry needs to get to. From the airline perspective, I'll say there is kind of, in the past, there's been the administrative burden of kind of these Excel spreadsheets that we've been using to kind of track our deliveries and allocations to corporate customers. And there's widespread recognition that that is not kind of the level of rigor that kind of the market needs, and moving to the registries is what we're all kind of actively trying to do. I'd say there are still some hurdles to doing that. Kind of some dependencies on players higher up the value chain, as well as there's really just a lot of registries coming online. And so I think it's kind of an interesting, we'll all see it play out over the next months or years of having 15 registries is too much of an administrative burden for producers, airlines, and customers to have to participate across all of them. But just, agree that they're needed and help kind of mitigate the risk of double counting with, Excel spreadsheets, essentially. And then, of course, kind of the accounting systems there to be able to actually let all of these players in the market account for kind of the investments that they've made, and be able to say that, yes, we are having realized emissions reductions. I think one of the challenges today is kind of that lack of formal recognition makes it difficult for some players to be willing to put the investment, because it is a lot of money, into SAF. So I think they all play an important role and are needed, but it's also important to recognize where their lanes are as well.
Sure. And so, Brian, Scott, we're talking about different types and trucks and different infrastructure than just the physical world. How's it been participating in that, and kind of what learnings have you had in using these different systems to deliver for your clients?
I think there's a real advantage to having been in the low carbon fuel space for some time, because the programs that we've worked under for a long time, which are, of course, the LCSF program in California, the RFS, the Canadian Clean Fuels Regulation, this data is what has to travel with on road fuels anyways in order to generate a RIN, to generate an LCSF credit. What we're doing is perhaps using a different calculation, whether it's going to be the CORSIA calculation, that's fine. We're fluent in all these. The data of the bills of lading that follow feedstock in and certifications and the BOLs for the trucks or for the shipment in a pipeline, these are all readily available, and we've been having to use these to demonstrate our compliance with these large government schemes for almost 20 years now, since 2005 when they came in. And so the data is readily available in order to ensure qualification, ensuring our, the relationship or the use of third-party verifiers, auditors is become extremely robust. And don't forget that I think know your customer, getting to understand who your supplier is, who the customer is an extremely important relationship to build. And so what we're really talking about, I think, is carbon accounting, that we're trying to say, do we agree that these are the rules for it? And so effectively, we're establishing generally accepted accounting principles that will consistently get more and more robust. And if there is ever an issue, it's therefore should be uncovered very quickly, and therefore it will adapt in the same way that the rules for finance and accounting adapt. And we have to be open collectively as a community to saying, what is the best way to do this? I think that a significant majority of that system is available to us today, and we have to fix it to ensure that we're comfortable doing business together, and that we're not going to be doing partnerships, supply agreements with people that are anything but above reproach. And so as long as everybody embraces these things, I think that we are so far down the curve with this. It really is about establishing which ones you follow. Is it going to be for a certification system? Is it RSB? Is it ISCC? As long as you agree on what those are and ensure that they are rigidly followed, third-party verified, and transferred over. I completely agree with what Sarah was saying with regards to how are we going to convey that data. I think that's going to be a really interesting opportunity. We're working on something ourselves because we agree it's got to evolve from the Excel spreadsheet where it is now. It has to become more sophisticated. I think that the registries, provided they have independence, they have cybersecurity, and they're mutually agreeable to both parties, then I think that there's going to be a number of them that may start out, and we'll see how that progresses, whether it's going to coalesce down to 1, 2, 3. I think there's going to be options. But I think we have to be open, we have to be professional, we have to attain the highest standards, because it's in all of our best interests. And so the people on the phone, the people on this call, we have to really take a stewardship position as to the development of the industry and realize that anything goes wrong, it's going to hurt us all for a long time. We have to make the right moves.
Sure. And while we're on this registry, I think the registries are essential, and they're often going to be the first thing that folks see or experience in this. But there are these other systems, to the left in sustainability, to the right in accounting. Madison, I'm curious if before we get to the topic that gets me excited, accounting a little bit, curious if you can kind of help us, what do you see in this space in terms of, risks or important points of tracking and tracing that are worth folks knowing about?
Yeah, and I think really to build on what Scott and Sarah said, the fundamental rules that support these registries and that commonality and agreement among them, even though there might be different standards of what the carbon intensity, what the feedstocks, what the sustainability of SAFs in these registries are, could be different. And I think we'll see regional. I know we're talking about North America, but we're going to see global differences. And part of this also is going to a question in the chat of how we incorporate voluntary market and regulatory market into these SAF packages that are also getting put on these registries. How does that interact? And I think Scott alluded to this a little bit, is, for the regulatory side, there is, one way of calculating carbon intensity, there's CORSIA, there's GREET, there's that. The fuel can have that, and yet it can still participate in a voluntary market of meeting those sustainability criteria that the corporate customers want and go on those registries. I think those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, and yet that all gets built into the package of what that SAF attribute is. And I think it's the rules that help, create this commonality amongst registries that fundamentally support that. And I think, again, going back to how critical those are, there are going to be a whole huge number of registries out there. It doesn't mean you need to participate in all of them, but if you choose to participate in a couple of them, you want to have confidence that the others are putting the same due diligence into their registries and information package that you're choosing to work on as the others, and just to support the marketplace. But I think that builds into the accounting piece. That is what you're super excited about, is ensuring that these registries have the right information and these attributes have the right information that you can account for this SAF. So again, what you're buying, has it been already used in other areas, and how do I then get to account for it? Because I know if it's generated credits, I am still eligible to use it for other areas. So I think that actually provides a foundation. The rules and the registries provide a foundation for it. And I know Smart Freight Center is doing a lot of work, and COSAP is participating in that, about that registry interoperability, and how can we really work to get these rules, and how can we track this fuel so we can eliminate the double counting piece, and how does that come through the actual tracking and standardization of that tracking. So I know that's a piece you're working on as well, as we transition into that accounting, but I just wanted to kind of drive home that point of how important those rules are for those registries.
Yeah, no, absolutely crucial. And again, as we said before, following standard definitions of chain of custody and mirroring other industries. I think that stop and start, or the stoplight, wasn't an intended pun there on the right side of the screen, but it's fairly indicative of also where some of these people feel in this necessarily deliberative but also drawn out processes of two of the large bodies here, GHG and NSBTI, GHGP rather, and SBTI. So folks definitely go out there and join those work groups and get their latest information. We respect everything that's going on in that space. Yeah, from the SFC side, just super briefly, we've kind of been pioneering the physical accounting from the GLEC framework, starting back in the early 20-teens. That like now, year and a half, 2 years ago, became the ISO 14083. So really, really happy that our organization has been able to be additive to the market in terms of helping folks describe their physical accounting, and then that led into an aviation insetting guidance in 2021, or actually a white paper in 20, and then 2021. Other important kind of accounting pieces jumped in with WEF, CST, COSAFA 2023, and 24. Smart Freight Center put out its voluntary market-based measures framework for logistics, emissions accounting, and reporting. This year, by the end of the year, we're going to be providing a conformity assessment scheme and a certification pathway for folks who are doing, high-quality book and claim, much the same way we provide the same lever for folks to distinguish their high-quality ISO 14083 accounting. Really, that accounting piece, can underpin a lot of this, but curious, we can go back a little bit, maybe to Andre just real quick, or Brian, kind of what is this flow from sustainability certification through to registries into accounting? Kind of like what does it mean for me? Not me, because I don't operate a plane, or I'm not advising a buyer's group like you are, Andre. And curious if you can add some perspective to some of these system tools we've been reviewing, and then we'll hop into some Q&A.
Sure. So I'll start off first, Andre, if you want. So like when we started this program long ago, when we identified, 5 years or 6 years ago, that like the corporate customer was going to be the demand for this. When we started talking to the corporate customers, Sarah and Andre already kind of touched on it, is like they want credible, emission reduction tools, right? They want to make sure there's no double counting. They want to make sure there's lots of integrity in this process, and they really want to make sure that they can use them as a mitigation method, right? So without the greenhouse gas protocol recognizing SAF back in the day and book and claim, and SBTI not having clear guidance on how do you use SAF to meet your targets. Like we were under a push of like, how do we then demonstrate SAF so we can go out and get SAF, we can put it in the aviation network, we can then trace it through the aviation system, supply it into an airport, and then allocate those, scope 1s and scope 3s to airlines and customers, and kind of prove how we can put integrity into this system, all with the goal of, getting the greenhouse gas protocols, SBTI, getting these frameworks together. So, one of the things we've done at Shell was back in 2021 when we were starting to introduce SAF and our customers didn't want any more spreadsheets. And I think Scott explained it, like we can track this fuel for the most part from start to finish. And it involves certificate of analysis, multiple bills of lading, right? Proof of sustainability documentation. Like it's a packet of information. And what the customer doesn't want that packet of information, right? And they certainly don't want it on a spreadsheet. And so we started, like at the time, there was no other system out there. So we built this Aviation system just to get going, right? So we said, okay, there's nothing out there. Corporations want to buy this stuff. So we built Aviation to then, it houses all of our documents in there. So we go out and we get the fuel certified. So we get an ISCC CORSIA certification. We get a proof of sustainability with that. We then deliver it through the supply chain, like Scott says, like how fuels do to meet our regulatory compliance. And inside of that packet of information, we've got bills of lading, certificate of analysis to prove it was blended, prove it was injected into airports. That packet of information gets downloaded, and then we inject it into the airport, and there's a final bill of lading that shows that this fuel went that way. And inside of Aviation, what we have done is that we created blockchain tokens to say, here's a unique identifier for a gallon of SAF for a scope 1 operator. Here's a scope 3 operator. And then we've also gone out and gotten the system then third-party audited at the end of the year to say, audit that packet of information in there to make sure the volume in, the volume out, the chain of custody flow to the airport, it is what it is. So the same amount of volume went in, the same amount of volume went out, and all the data gets in it, and all the data is correct. And we did that with trying to get this going, right? So we need corporate demand. We need to instill integrity into the processes and systems, and we just needed to get going, right? Is it perfect? Probably not perfect, but we just wanted to get going to start proving to corporations beyond the early adapters, right? So you have the early adapters here, but we need more than the early adapters. We need more corporations on the back, supplying more demand into the system, which we can put more supply into. And then to also, like, as that wave grows, we can put pressure and, come together as a community to say, this is how we believe this should work, right? And so, and then once we believe as a community how it should work, then we get, like the confusion of 15 different, methodologies and the different types of thought processes. And we all kind of need to start coming together into one lane so that the NGOs and the customers and the greenhouse gas protocol and the SBTI are not confused anymore. Like we can start pushing and we can start educating and we start growing. So, we went down that process to just try to start this and get going to prove that this can be done. And we can adapt it as the process goes, but we just want to get demand going and flowing so we can provide, the data to the customers there.
Yeah. And you airlines are super used to chains of custody and delivering stuff. You're used to using commingled fuel farms. It's amazing how many of our products rely on these theories, or not theories, these solid practices and chains of custody. Appreciate that comment on the systems. As we switch into Q&A, Andre, I'm curious, if you can add or want to add anything, fine. If not, how folks have been using these systems, from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I just double down on a couple of things that Brian said. When you unpack some of the content in both the slides and also what we've described, it can feel pretty complicated. I mean, there's a number of different third-party certifications. There's a lot of data and documentation that needs to flow through the system and different registries to choose from. A lot of that is not really the job of the corporate customer, except for the back-end accounting stuff, how they deal with the certificate in their inventory. That is some active work that needs to take place from the customer. So while they don't really need to do that stuff at the front end of the value chain, they do want assurances that it's being done. And there are different systems and documentations that can clearly display, yes or no, is my fuel certified? Yes or no, did it go through the registry? So it's that kind of like binary information that I think is really important for the corporate customer. And the other thing that I would say is that while it looks complicated, this can be done, and it is being done. There are experts, fuel providers like Shell and World Energy that have been doing this for decades and for different means, and they're now applying it to the voluntary market for sustainable aviation fuel. So I think an important takeaway here is that, we have found a way for the system to work. Can it be improved? Yes. But if you're a corporate customer, don't stay out of the market due to the complexity. There are systems that can actually deliver what you're looking for, which are high integrity SAF certificates.
Amazing. Well, want to squeeze a lot into this Q&A section if we can here just a second and still give a moment to let folks be on time for their next endeavor. But appreciate this question from Emily. Thanks so much. Can you say more about how voluntary markets and book and claim interact with government mandates? Queuing up Sarah, you and Scott, if possible. Is it a choice between one and the other? How much actual potential is there to scale SAF via purely voluntary demand? And will corporate customers decarbonize aviation?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it is really interesting to keep the voluntary market participating in this. I think we need everybody to be pulling in the same direction, but the concept of additionality is very important to the development of the SAF industry writ large. And the fact of the matter is that if it's mandated, then we are back to dealing with the producer and the obligated party being a producer or importer of petroleum products. And you have a challenge conveying, you can't convey the scope 1 and scope 3 to the voluntary community. And so there's two different ways to go about it. Certainly in Europe, they tend to refer to it as the stick. Everybody has to do this, and they will, drop the overall carbon intensity of the aviation fuel pool down by a certain percentage by a certain time. And in North America, there tends to be more of to look more for market solutions where possible. And so I think that right now, the opt-in that we've got in the US, it allows for both to coexist. So the voluntary market, along with additionality, is what's going to get stands a better chance of getting the industry off the ground. And I think that the airlines are so committed to lowering their carbon intensity. I think that by keeping it in their hands, as well as their customers, the people that fly, the scope 3s that fly on the planes, I think that is a potent resource that we wouldn't want to cut out of the chain. I think that I'm in favor of policy that both promotes SAF and allows for the voluntary market to legitimately participate. I think we're going to need everybody, because one of the largest aspects of the cost is the fact that this is all new infrastructure that is being put in here, production infrastructure. And I think that it's something that can't be overlooked.
Sure. Sarah, curious if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think Scott did a fantastic job kind of outlining carrot versus stick. And of course, we are incredibly grateful and supportive of all of the SAF incentives in the US. I think kind of to the question around, will corporate customers decarbonize aviation? I think this is an interesting question. And also I'll throw in freight customers as well, not just corporate customers, are a vital part of bridging until we are at the point where, all jet fuel is SAF and we don't even need book and claim because all jet fuel is SAF. I've had conversations with, even people on this call, if there's the ideal interim state, and then there's kind of the ideal end state. And so I do think corporate customers are going to get us to the interim ideal state. And then ultimately, airlines need to be able to fly with SAF as part of our normal operations. And I think it's important that we also do so while keeping flying accessible. Southwest cares a lot about democratizing the skies. And we've seen kind of in the news recently that the impact of some of the regulations is going to limit people's ability to fly.
Sure. Makes sense. Last question, 1 minute, Andre. Curious if I could throw this one at you, put you on the hot seat. what is your opinion of cross-continental book and claim? You know, our book and claim is something where we detach the physical. We want to decarbonize aviation overall, but for example, delivered in Europe, or in this case, this is a North America webinar, delivered in North America, of course, we saw all those SAF plants, but claimed elsewhere. And then we'll pass it back to Roz.
Yeah, I think the quick answer is that we're in favor of cross-continental exchanges. I think the logic of book and claim is that the system applies globally, and so it shouldn't really matter where the SAF is produced in order to take an environmental claim. So the SAF could be produced in Europe, and you could purchase a Scope 3 attribute even if you're located in Ohio. That's really kind of the fundamental principle of separating the physical product from the environmental attribute.
Yeah, if I may, I'm not sure where the logic would be to put a geographic barrier in there. And it's ironic that it would be in the aviation industry, which spends its time going from one place to the other. And so I think that as long as the rules are robust, set, transparent, and verified, you know, we have one atmosphere that we're trying to mitigate carbon emissions in. I'm not sure. I just have never understood the logic of saying it's okay between, you know, on this continent, but not if you are talking with a company that's domiciled on another continent. It's confusing to me.
Panelists, any last word? Maybe like Twitter length or X length of a comment, and then Roz. All right, going once, going twice. Hey, super appreciate it, you all. It's been a great conversation.
I would also like to
Roz,
say
back
a
to you.
huge thank you. Sorry, a huge thank you to you all, and thank you also for saving those last comments, as I don't want to make anyone late for any next meetings. Thank you to everyone who attended. If you would like to learn more about everything that's been discussed today, or as is likely we didn't get a chance to get to your question, make sure to join us in Houston on October 2nd to 4th for Sustainable Aviation Futures North America Congress, and go to www.sustainableaviationfutures.com for full details of all of our events, training courses, and SAF Spotlight. Thank you again to our brilliant panel, really, really insightful, and thank you to our attendees. Hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yep.